I grew up in a family where appearances meant everything. From the outside, people would say we were the picture-perfect clan. Sunday church attendance, big smiles in holiday photos, and a house that looked immaculate enough to belong in a glossy magazine. But on the inside, things were different. Behind those polished smiles was a hierarchy, a pecking order. And I unfortunately always seemed to sit at the very bottom. My name is Lena, the middle child of 3 siblings. My older sister, Clara, was the golden one. You know, the T'Pol was dressed in the trendiest clothes, always the center of attention. My parents adored her, teachers praised her, and boys practically worshipped her. She had this ability to light up a room, but the problem was, she knew it. Clara used her charm like a weapon, and most of the time, I was her target. Then there was my younger brother, Ethan, the baby of the family. He could do no wrong. If Clara was the shining star, Ethan was the delicate treasure everyone wanted to protect. Mom would hover around him constantly, asking if he'd eaten enough, if he needed help with homework, if he was tired. Meanwhile, I, sandwiched in the middle, was expected to manage on my own. I don't mean to sound bitter, but it's hard not to when you're treated like the family afterthought. If Clara forgot to do the dishes, it was, oh, she must have been busy with school. If Ethan left his clothes on the floor, it was, he's still young. But if I so much as breathed too loudly, my mother would snap. Lena, can't you do anything right? Growing up under that kind of shadow leaves marks. I remember one Christmas vividly when I was 10 years old. We were sitting around the tree and everyone was unwrapping gifts. Clara got a brand new camera, the one she'd been begging for. Ethan got a shiny red bike that he could barely sit on without wobbling. And me, I got socks. Socks, and not even the cute fuzzy ones with patterns. The plain white socks, the kind that came in a 6-pack from the discount store. I remember holding them in my lap, trying to smile so no one would see the tears threatening to spill. Dad chuckled when he saw my expression. Well, you always lose yours, don't you? Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Mom scolded me when I sulked later, saying, "Don't be ungrateful. At least you got something." That was the first time I realized in my family, no matter what I did, I would always be the least important one. Years passed and the divide only grew stronger. Clara went off to college and every phone call from my parents revolved around her achievements. She graduated with honors, landed a corporate job, and was soon making 6 figures. Every holiday gathering became a celebration of Clara's success. Ethan followed a different path, but still received nothing but praise. He didn't go to college, but he opened his own auto repair shop with help from Dad's connections. Business boomed, and Mom never missed an opportunity to brag about how entrepreneurial her baby boy was. And me. I worked quietly as a librarian. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't earn much, but I loved books. They gave me the escape I needed, the voices I could lean on when my own family silenced mine. But to my parents, my job was unimpressive. "So you just sit and read all day?" Dad once asked with a smirk. "It's not really a career, is it?" Mom chimed in. Every time they said things like that, I'd bite my tongue until it bled, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. The real story began when Clara announced her engagement. Of course, it was front-page news in the family. She was marrying Daniel, a wealthy banker, and the wedding was set to be the grandest event our town had ever seen. From the moment the engagement was announced, my parents went into overdrive. Dress fittings, venue tours, endless discussions about the guest list. I sat silently through most of it, trying to be supportive but also painfully aware that my presence barely mattered. When the invitation finally arrived in the mail, I remember holding it like it was something fragile. The envelope was embossed with gold, the lettering elegant. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a statement. Clara was showing the world her superiority, and I was just one of the many people expected to applaud. I tucked it into my drawer and stared at it for days. A part of me didn't even want to go. I knew what would happen. I'd sit in a corner, overlooked, while my family fawned over Clara and Daniel. But then another part of me whispered, "Go, not for them, but for yourself." At that time, money was tight for me. Rent, bills, grocery sets, all added up quickly on a librarian's salary. I barely had enough for basic needs, let alone a wedding gift. I dreaded the thought of showing up empty-handed. But I also knew I couldn't compete with the lavish presents Clara's friends and colleagues would bring. I remember standing in a department store one afternoon, staring at the wedding registry. Crystal vases, high-end blenders, designer cookware sets, everything was outrageously expensive. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the list, realizing I couldn't afford even the cheapest item. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my head in my hands. What am I going to do? I thought. If I bring nothing, they'll laugh. If I bring something small, they'll still laugh. But then an idea struck me. It wasn't about the size of the gift, it was about the meaning. I decided I would give them something simple, something that might look small on the outside but carried weight on the inside. I took out a blank card, wrote a heartfelt note, and tucked an envelope inside with a gift that, to me, represented years of sacrifice. It wasn't flashy, and I knew they wouldn't understand right away. But one day they would. As the wedding day drew closer, I could feel the tension in my chest growing. Phone calls from Mom were filled with gushing details about Clara's dress, the menu, the orchestra, the guest list. Every time I wanted to scream, "Do you even care that I'll be there too?" But I never did. Instead, I quietly prepared. I found a modest dress in the back of my closet, something I'd worn only once to a work event. I couldn't afford a new one, and I told myself it didn't matter. I packed the small envelope into my purse, praying it wouldn't look as pitiful as I feared. The night before the wedding, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind swirled with images of Clara surrounded by admirers, Ethan cracking jokes at my expense, parents looking at me with that same mix of disappointment and disinterest. But there was also a spark inside Mia, tiny flame of defiance. For once, I wasn't going to let their opinions crush me. I was going to walk into that wedding with my head held high, gift in hand, no matter how small it seemed. And so, the stage was set. A family defined by favoritism, a sister's wedding destined to be the grand event of the year. And me, the forgotten middle child holding a gift that would change everything. I didn't know it then, but that envelope, that small act of quiet rebellion, would be the spark that turned years of humiliation upside down. The morning of Clara's wedding dawned like a scene from a movie. The sun was shining through my thin curtains, painting golden streaks across my small, cramped apartment. Birds chirped outside as if celebrating, but inside my stomach churned with nerves. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring at the envelope lying in front of me. My hands brushed over it, hesitating. It was so plain compared to the elaborate ribbon-wrapped boxes I knew would be piled high on the gift table. Just an ordinary white envelope sealed with nothing more than a sticker of a gold heart I'd found at the bottom of my drawer. For a moment, I considered skipping the wedding entirely. Just calling in sick, making up some excuse, disappearing. But then I remembered how Clara's laughter always echoed louder than mine. How my parents' disapproving looks haunted me, even in sleep. No, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of labeling me a coward. I slipped the envelope into my purse, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "You belong there too." The venue was nothing short of extravagant. A grand estate on the outskirts of town with sprawling gardens and marble fountains that sprayed arcs of water into the air. Rows of imported roses lined the walkway, and the entrance was draped in white silk ribbons. Guests in designer outfits strolled about, sipping champagne from crystal flutes even before the ceremony had begun. As I stepped out of the cab, I felt my heart sink. My modest navy dress suddenly seemed drab against the glittering gowns and tailored suits around me. My shoes, slightly scuffed at the heel, betrayed the fact that they had been worn one too many times. I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the glass doors, hair neatly tied, makeup simple, smile forced. I adjusted my posture and walked in, though every step felt heavy with self-consciousness. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I won't deny that. Clara looked stunning in her lace gown, the kind of dress that sparkled under the sunlight. Daniel, her groom, stood tall and confident, his suit custom-made, his smile polished for the cameras. They exchanged vows beneath a floral arch that probably cost more than my annual salary. Everyone around me sighed in admiration, dabbing at their eyes with tissues. I sat quietly in the third row. A place chosen for me, not too close to the front where family pride belonged, but not far enough back to be scandalous. I clapped when everyone else clapped. I smiled when everyone else smiled. But inside, I felt like a spectator in someone else's fairy tale, unwanted yet forced to attend. After the ceremony, the reception hall was unveiled, and it was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, their light reflecting off golden table settings. A live band played soft jazz as waiters glided between tables with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I found my assigned seat near the edge of the hall. Not at the family table, of course, that was reserved for Clara, Daniel, and their closest circle. I was placed next to distant cousins I barely knew, as if to remind me that my presence was more obligation than honor. The chatter around me was filled with praise for Clara. She's always been destined for greatness. One aunt gushed. Daniel is such a catch. They're perfect together, another cooed. No one asked me about my life. No one even remembered what I did for a living. It wasn't long before the time came for the couple to open their gifts. The MC announced it cheerfully, and all the guests gathered around the stage. A mountain of perfectly wrapped boxes and gift bags had been arranged, glittering with bows and ribbons. I froze in my seat, clutching my purse. My small envelope suddenly felt like a scarlet letter. I could almost hear Clara's voice mocking me. "Really, Lena?" That's it. But I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled as I walked to the table, sliding my envelope between the massive boxes. It looked pitiful, lost among the grandeur. I quickly retreated to my seat, my cheeks burning. Sure enough, I caught sight of Ethan smirking from across the room. He leaned toward Clara and whispered something, making her laugh. She didn't even try to hide her amusement. Dinner was served steak, lobster, and an array of gourmet dishes I could hardly pronounce. Wine flowed freely, laughter filled the air, and then came the toasts. Dad stood up first, raising his glass. "To my beautiful daughter Clara and her wonderful husband Daniel. You've made us so proud. We know you'll have a life filled with love and success." The crowd erupted in cheers. Mom followed, her voice dripping with emotion. "Clara, you've always been the light of this family. And Daniel, thank you for cherishing her the way she deserves." More applause. Then Ethan, of course, had to take his turn. "To my big sister, who always had the brains and the beauty. And to Daniel, who clearly has good taste." Everyone laughed. And then his eyes flicked toward me. "Oh, and to Lena. Thanks for showing up." The room chuckled, though it was awkward, hesitant. My face burned as I stared at my plate, wishing it would swallow me whole. Finally, the couple began unwrapping the gifts on stage. Everyone gathered around like it was a spectacle. Laughter and cheers erupted as they unveiled expensive appliances, designer decor, and fat envelopes stuffed with cash. Then Clara reached for mine. My small white envelope looked almost comical in her manicured hands. She held it up for everyone to see, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, what's this?" "From Lena," she announced, her tone laced with mockery. The audience leaned in. My palms grew sweaty. Clara tore it open and pulled out the card. She read the note briefly, then glanced at the envelope's contents. For a second, her expression froze, but then she quickly masked it with a smirk. "An envelope gift. How quaint," she said, holding it up between her fingers. Ethan snickered. "Let me guess, $5." The crowd burst into laughter. I wanted to disappear. My heart pounded in my chest, shame flooding me like a tidal wave. I tried to hold my composure, but tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. Daniel gave Clara a polite nudge, whispering something, but she shook her head and waved it off. "It's fine. We all know Lena's." "Simple," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The laughter grew louder. At that moment, I felt the years of humiliation crashing down on every insult, every dismissal, every time I'd been made to feel like less. And now, in front of dozens of people, my family had once again turned me into the punchline. I forced a smile, though my throat ached from holding back tears. Inside, I was screaming. As they moved on to the next gift, I sat frozen in my chair. My hands trembled under the table. Why do I keep letting them do this to me? Why did I even come here? But then another thought surfaced. They think they've humiliated me. They think my gift is worthless. But they have no idea what's inside. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Let them laugh. Let them mock me. The truth would come soon enough. The night carried on with music and dancing, but the sting of their laughter clung to me like a shadow. I felt small, invisible, ridiculed. Yet beneath that shame, a seed of defiance began to grow. They thought my small gift was a joke. They thought I was nothing. But when the envelope was truly opened, not just glanced at, but truly seen, it would change everything. The laughter at my expense still echoed in my head long after. Clara had tossed my envelope aside on the gift table. People had already moved on, focused on the mountain of lavish boxes still waiting to be unwrapped. But for me, the humiliation lingered like a fresh wound. I sat there, silent, picking at the hem of my dress, trying to keep my breathing steady. On the outside, I managed to smile whenever someone glanced my way, but on the inside, I was screaming. Why do I always let them do this? Why am I always the easy target? But as the evening went on, I kept reminding myself, they didn't truly open it. They didn't see it for what it was. That thought was my lifeline, the only thing stopping me from bolting out of the hall in tears. As the orchestra played soft music and the guests mingled, I noticed Daniel the groom glance at my envelope again. It was sitting on the table beside him, half hidden beneath wrapping paper scraps. He picked it up, tapped it curiously against his palm, then slid it into his suit pocket without Clara noticing. I watched quietly, my heart pounding. Did he suspect something? Did he actually sense that it wasn't just $5, as Ethan had cruelly joked? But then my eyes shifted to my parents. They were at the family table, laughing with relatives, acting as though the earlier mockery had been nothing more than harmless fun. I wanted to scream at them. How could you laugh with everyone else? I'm your daughter too. But I knew they wouldn't listen. They never did. The evening unfolded with dance and chatter, but a strange unease began to ripple through the room. I noticed Daniel whispering to Clara again, this time with a more serious expression. She brushed him off, too busy soaking up the attention from her friends. A few minutes later, I saw him slip away toward the back of the hall. He looked around briefly before disappearing through the side doors, the envelope still in his hand. My stomach tightened. He's going to read it. I pressed my trembling hands against my lap. A storm of emotions swirled inside me: fear, relief, anticipation. This was the moment I had both dreaded and prayed for. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to explain what I had placed inside that envelope. For years, while my parents and siblings laughed at my unimpressive life, I had been working quietly on something meaningful. I lived frugally, saving every extra cent I could, while Clara spent her money on luxury clothes and vacations. And Ethan invested in flashy cars. I tucked away modest amounts into a savings account I never spoke about. Then, about 5 years ago, I started volunteering at a local literacy foundation. I met children who couldn't afford books, families who couldn't afford school supplies, and young adults who had dreams but no resources to chase them. That's when I decided if I ever had the chance, I would help. So I started channeling my savings into a scholarship fund. Slowly, steadily, it grew. And when Clara's wedding approached, I decided this was the perfect time to reveal it. Inside that envelope was not just a small sum of money, but legal documents, the official paperwork establishing the Lena Hart Literacy Scholarship, endowed with over $25,000. I had saved over the years. The first recipients were already lined up, bright kids from underprivileged families, ready to start college because of that fund. My note inside the card explained everything to Clara and Daniel. I know today is a celebration of love and a new beginning. In your honor, I've created a scholarship that will also represent new beginnings for others. May your union inspire more than just those around you, but also those who dream of a brighter future. It wasn't just a gift. It was a legacy. When Daniel returned to the hall about 15 minutes later, His entire demeanor had shifted. He no longer carried the easy, polished grin he had worn all evening. Instead, his expression was thoughtful, even a little shaken. He walked straight to Clara and whispered something urgently in her ear. Her smile faltered. She looked annoyed, then confused, then slightly pale. He told her, I realized, my heart pounding. Clara glanced around the room, her eyes scanning until they landed on me. For the first time in years, she didn't look smug or superior. She looked unsettled. Soon, Daniel asked for the microphone. The band paused mid-song, and all eyes turned to the newlyweds again. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady but charged with something deeper. I want to take a moment to recognize a gift we received tonight. A gift that, at first glance, may have seemed small. But when I truly opened it, I realized it was one of the most meaningful gestures I've ever encountered. The room hushed. People exchanged puzzled glances. Clara shifted uncomfortably beside him, trying to smile but failing. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel continued, Lena, your gift wasn't just generous, it was transformative. You didn't just give us something material. You gave us a legacy. You created a scholarship in our name that will change lives. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads swiveled toward me. Clara's face froze in shock. Ethan's jaw literally dropped. My parents blinked rapidly, as though they couldn't process what they were hearing, and me. I sat there trembling, trying to stay composed as the weight of Daniel's words sank in. The energy in the room changed instantly. Guests who had laughed earlier now looked at me with wide eyes filled with admiration. I heard whispers spreading across the tables. Did she really start a scholarship? $25.00. That's incredible. I never knew Lena had that in her. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. The spotlight that had always belonged to Clara now shifted toward me, and she couldn't stop it. Clara tried to recover, forcing a smile as she grabbed the microphone. Well, isn't that sweet? She said, her voice trembling slightly. But really, Lena, you shouldn't have. It's a wedding, not a charity gala. Her attempt at brushing it off fell flat. The crowd wasn't buying it. If anything, her dismissive tone made her look small compared to what I had done. Daniel, however, wasn't about to let her diminish the moment. He placed a firm hand on her shoulder. No, Clara, he said, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. This is extraordinary. Your sister deserves recognition for this. Clara's face burned red. She quickly handed the microphone back to the MC, muttering something under her breath. I looked toward Mom and Dad, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement. Pride, even a small nod of approval. But instead, they just sat there, stiff and silent. Mom's lips were pressed into a thin line. Dad avoided my gaze altogether. Their lack of response hurt more than I expected. Even when the entire room was applauding me, my parents still couldn't bring themselves to show pride. But as the applause grew louder, as people began clapping and even standing, I realized something important. I didn't need their validation anymore. The MC returned to the stage and, smiling widely, announced, Let's give a round of applause for Lena Hart and her incredible generosity. The room erupted. People clapped, cheered, and even called my name. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten middle child. I was the one everyone saw, admired, respected. I stood slowly, my knees shaking, and offered a small bow of thanks. My eyes met Clara's across the room. She looked furious, her perfect wedding suddenly overshadowed by the sister she had spent a lifetime mocking. And in that moment, I felt a surge of vindication I had never known before. That was the night everything shifted. What they thought was a small, laughable gift turned out to be the most powerful revelation of all. The humiliation I had suffered earlier was wiped away, replaced with admiration, shock, and, for Clara, jealousy. She could no longer hide. They had laughed at my small gift. But when they truly opened the envelope, they realized I wasn't the weak, invisible Lena anymore. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The storm was still brewing, and the reckoning was yet to come. The applause rang in my ears like thunder. For a moment, I was stunned into stillness, as if the entire room had transformed into a dream I'd never dared to imagine. People were clapping for, but not Clara. Not Ethan, not my parents, but for me, Lena, the one they had always overlooked. It was overwhelming. I could feel the sting of tears in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and accepted the moment. For years, I had been invisible. Tonight, that invisibility shattered. Guests who had barely acknowledged me earlier now rushed to my side, eager to shake my hand, congratulate me, or simply tell me how inspiring my gift was. "Lena, that's remarkable," one woman gushed, clutching my arm. "What a selfless thing to do." "I had no idea you were so generous," another man said. "Your sister is lucky to have you." Each word felt like a balm on old wounds I didn't realize were still bleeding. For once, I wasn't the background character in my own family story. I was the headline. Across the room, Clara sat stiffly at the family table, her lips pressed into a smile so tight it looked painful. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes darted toward me with something between fury and disbelief. Ethan, on the other hand, was less subtle. He muttered to anyone who would listen. She probably exaggerated. "You really think Lena could pull off something like that?" But no one was listening to him anymore. The tide had turned. I glanced at my parents, still hoping for some sign of pride. But their faces were masks of discomfort. Mom fiddled with her napkin, her jaw tight, while Dad sipped his wine as though drowning himself in the glass. It hurt, yes, but instead of breaking me, it fueled me. For years, I had craved their approval like oxygen. Tonight, I realized I could breathe just fine without it. The band resumed playing, but the atmosphere had shifted. Clara's carefully crafted wedding spotlight now had a second star, and she hated it. Every time someone clapped me on the back or complimented me, I saw her flinch. Finally, she could take it no more. She stood, heels clicking against the marble floor, and strode toward me. "Lena," she said, her smile stretched thin, "can I have a word?" Her tone wasn't a request, it was a command. The crowd quieted slightly, sensing the tension. She pulled me aside just enough that people pretended not to watch but were absolutely listening. "What are you trying to do?" She hissed, her eyes blazing. "This is my wedding, not your charity event." I met her glare calmly. "I wasn't trying to take anything from you. It was a gift, Clara. A gift in your honor." Her laugh was bitter. "Don't act innocent. You knew exactly what you were doing. You couldn't stand being overshadowed, so you pulled this stunt." I felt something snap inside me. Years of silence, years of swallowing my pain erupted all at once. "Are you serious right now?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Do you hear yourself? For my whole life, you've had everything. The praise, the attention, the love. I never tried to take that from you. I gave quietly. I lived quietly. And the one time I do something meaningful, something selfless, you call it a stunt." Her eyes widened. She wasn't used to me talking back. "This wasn't about you," I continued, my voice shaking with fury, but loud enough for others to hear. "It was about helping kids who deserve a chance. But you're so obsessed with being the center of attention that you can't see past your own reflection." Gasps echoed from nearby guests. Clara's face went pale. Daniel stepped forward then, placing himself between us. His voice was calm but firm. "Clara, she's right. This isn't about stealing your spotlight. It's about generosity, something we should all be proud to celebrate tonight." Lena did something extraordinary. Clara stared at him as though he'd betrayed her. "You're taking her side." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about sides. It's about what's right. Honestly, I admire her for it." The room murmured again. Clara's humiliation was no longer private, it was public. Of course, Ethan couldn't resist jumping in. He swaggered over, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, come on. You all really think our plain little Lena pulled this off? Probably some exaggeration. Who even checked the paperwork? Maybe it's fake." That was it. I'd had enough. "Fake," I snapped, reaching into my purse. My hands shook, But my resolve was solid. I pulled out the duplicate set of documents I'd kept for myself, signed, notarized, sealed. I held them up high for everyone to see. "This is the official paperwork," I declared, my voice echoing through the hall. "The scholarship is real. The first recipients are already chosen. This is happening whether any of you believe in me or not." Gasps filled the air again. Several guests leaned forward to glimpse the documents. Ethan's smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. The MC, sensing the drama but also recognizing the significance, approached with the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we've witnessed not only a beautiful wedding tonight, but also a moment of true generosity. I think it's clear Lena deserves recognition." The crowd erupted once more into applause, louder, stronger, unshakable. Clara stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides. Her perfect image was unraveling, thread by thread. For once, she wasn't the adored bride, the golden child, the star of the show. She was just another person flawed, jealous, and exposed. Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. "This was supposed to be my night," she whispered, barely audible over the clapping. I looked at her, not with pity, but with clarity. "It still is your night, Clara. But maybe it's time you learn that other people can shine too." People began approaching me again, offering congratulations and admiration. Several even asked how they could contribute to the scholarship, wanting to be part of something bigger than the wedding itself. In that moment, I realized my small act had grown into something larger than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about proving my worth to my family. Anymore, it was about creating change, inspiring others. And the more people rallied to me, the smaller Clara seemed. Eventually, Mom and Dad approached. Their faces were stiff, their smiles forced. "Lena," Mom said quietly, "you should have told us about this." I laughed bitterly. "Would you have listened? Or would you have dismissed me the way you always do?" Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "It's not that we don't appreciate it. It's just, you surprised us." "No," I said firmly. "You never expected anything from me. That's the truth. And now that I've proven you wrong, you don't know how to handle it." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, my parents had no comeback. I turned back to the crowd, my heart racing. All my life, I was told I wasn't enough. That I wasn't smart enough, successful enough, important enough. Tonight, I want to say this. We don't have to be the golden child to matter. We don't have to be the favorite to make a difference. What matters is what we do for others, the legacy we leave behind. The applause that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine, roaring, supportive. I felt powerful, vindicated, free. That night, justice was served not with cruelty, but with truth. Clara's perfect facade cracked under the weight of her jealousy. Ethan's arrogance was silenced by hard evidence. My parents were forced to face the reality that the daughter they had dismissed was capable of greatness. And me. I finally stood tall in my own story, not as the forgotten middle child, but as someone who had claimed her voice, her power, and her worth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in their shadows. I was shining on my own. And I wasn't done yet. The wedding reception carried on, but everything had shifted. The chandeliers still sparkled, the band still played, and the waiters still glided through the room with trays of wine and dessert, but the energy was different. The laughter no longer rang at my expense. The whispers were no longer about my shortcomings. For once, the conversations carried my name with respect instead of ridicule. I sat quietly at my table, watching it all unfold. Clara danced mechanically with Daniel, her smile plastered on but hollow. Ethan sulked at the bar, drinking more than he should, his charm fading with each glass. My parents sat stiffly, still processing the fact that their forgotten daughter had just become the centerpiece of the evening. And me. For the first time in my life, I felt free. People came to me throughout the night, not just with compliments, but with genuine interest. They asked about the scholarship, about the foundation, about my plans for the future. Some even offered to help donations, partnerships, ways to grow the program. It was surreal. All my life, I had been invisible in my family's eyes. But here, in this grand hall filled with strangers, I was finally seen. At one point, Daniel came to my table. He crouched down so he was at my eye level, his face soft with sincerity. "Lena," he said, "I can't thank you enough. What you've done knits bigger than a wedding gift. It's a legacy. And to be honest, I think it's the best gift Clara and I could have received." I searched his eyes for any hint of condescension, but there was none. Just genuine gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight. "I just wanted it to mean something." "It does," he assured me. "More than you realize." When the night finally wound down, I slipped out quietly. I didn't need to linger. I had said what I needed to say, shown what I needed to show. The taxi ride home felt surreal. The city lights blurred past the window as I leaned my head against the glass, replaying the night in my mind. The humiliation, the revelation, the vindication was all still fresh, raw, but powerful. I clutched the duplicate papers I had carried in my purse, running my fingers over the embossed seal. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. Proof that my worth had always been real, even if my family refused to see it. In the days that followed, the phone calls began. First came from extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had once barely remembered my name. They called to tell me how proud they were, how inspiring my gift had been, how sorry they were for not realizing who I really was. Then came colleagues from the library. Somehow, word had spread there too, and suddenly I wasn't just the quiet librarian anymore. I was the woman who had changed lives. They congratulated me, shared the news on social media, and even the local paper ran a short feature about the scholarship. And my family. Silence. It wasn't until a week later that my parents showed up at my apartment. They stood at my door looking uncomfortable, as though they were the ones who had been humiliated. "Can we come in?" Mom asked softly. I hesitated, but eventually stepped aside. They sat on my worn couch, glancing around my modest living room. For once, they didn't have criticism in their eyes, just unease. "Lena," Dad began, clearing his throat, "we didn't realize. What you've done is impressive. More than impressive." Mom nodded, though her eyes were downcast. "We're proud of you. We just didn't know how to say it." I folded my arms. "You didn't know how to see me? For years, I was right here, and you chose not to notice." Mom's lips trembled, but she said nothing. I continued, my voice steady. "I don't need your approval anymore. I spent my whole life craving it, but I've learned something. I don't need to prove myself to you. I already know my worth." The silence that followed was heavy but liberating. For the first time, I had spoken my truth without fear. A few days later, Clara called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was tight, strained. "Lena," she said, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I blinked in surprise. Clara never apologized. "I shouldn't have mocked your gift. I was jealous. Everyone was looking at you, and I couldn't stand it. But now I realize how selfish I was." I listened quietly, letting her words sink in. "You did something incredible," she continued, "and I should have been proud to call you my sister." There was sincerity in her tone, but also fragility, as though admitting this shattered her perfect image of herself. For a moment, I considered lashing out, reminding her of all the years she had belittled me. But then I took a deep breath. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. "It means something." Because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about freeing myself from it. Ethan never called. I wasn't surprised. He had always been the loudest critic, the most dismissive. Admitting he was wrong would mean shattering his ego, and that was something he would never do. But that was okay. I didn't need his apology either. Months later, I attended the ceremony where the first recipients of the Lena Hart Literacy Scholarship were announced. Standing on that stage, watching the faces of those young students light up as they realized their dreams were within reach, was indescribable. Parents hugged me, students shook my hands, and one girl whispered through tears, "Because of you, I can go to college." Thank you. In that moment, I realized the true purpose of everything I had endured. The years of invisibility, the humiliation, the doubt it had all led me here. To this, to making a difference. Looking back, I see now that my family's neglect shaped me. But it didn't define me. Their dismissal pushed me toward books, toward quiet strength, toward saving in silence. It gave me the fire to prove to myself, more than anyone, that I was more than the role they had cast me in. I used to think revenge would mean making them hurt the way they made me hurt. But I've learned that true revenge, true justice, isn't about cruelty. It's about rising above, about showing them and the world that I never needed their approval to matter. If there's one thing I've taken from all of this, it's this. Never let anyone else define your worth. Families can fail you. People can overlook you. But as long as you know your own value, you can build something extraordinary. I was laughed at for my small gift. I was humiliated for daring to bring something that didn't shine on the outside. But when they opened the envelope, when they truly saw what was inside, everything changed. So now when I think back to that night, the laughter, the humiliation, the revelation, and the justice side don't feel bitterness anymore. I feel peace. Because in the end, I didn't just give Clara and Daniel a wedding gift. I gave myself something far greater, the strength to step out of the shadows and finally, unapologetically shine. And that is the gift that will last forever. And that's how it all unfolded. They laughed at my small gift, mocked me in front of everyone. But in the end, the truth came out and justice was served. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell because I've got plenty more powerful, real-life dramas just like this one coming your way. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful. And remember, even the smallest gift can hold the greatest power.